coast to coast here. So some folks in Vancouver, if you are showing up, trickling in with your coffees, and folks in the Maritimes are probably now after lunch, so eating their dessert, hopefully, or maybe their siestas. I know Anne Marie is going to Spain, so
That's right.
next week. So um, so yeah, so guys, welcome to another edition of Grow Your Brain. This is our monthly show where we bring somebody in from outside of, uh, could be outside of agencies. Some oftentimes, this is WARC's second time on the show, and this is all about growing our brains. So whether that is learning something new about the industry or learning something new about culture or something new about using tools that maybe we can apply to our roles as strategists. And today we have Ann Marie Kerwin from WARC, so the America's editor. Thank you, Anne Marie, for joining in our second time. So yeah, so she will be taking us through today their latest report on titled The Multiplier Effect. And this has been, launched in the end of January, correct, Anne Marie? And
Yes,
and
end of
so,
January. That's right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So some very interesting information here that hopefully everybody on the line and watching afterwards can apply to their roles. And then at the end, we'll open up for questions if anybody has any questions, and then we'll wrap it up at the end of the hour. So
Okay, great.
with that, over to you, Anne-Marie.
Okay, great. So I am the WARC's America's editor, and I am going to be talking about the multiplier effect today. Just to give a little background on WARC, WARC was started over 2 decades ago because David Ogilvy said that no other profession gets by with such a small bank of knowledge. So WARC stepped in to like fill that gap. And our role really is to try and aggregate all of the research that is going on that proves advertising effectiveness in one place. And then a lot of times we'll use that as a jumping off point to write our own reports like this one. So WARC, today we serve over 75,000 marketers in more than 1,200 companies in over 100 markets. Our aim is always to give the evidence and argument that you need to make the case to do great marketing. So that's the point of this report. Okay, hold on. Let me just see. Okay, there we go. Okay, so why did we do this report now? You're probably wondering. Well, we know there are a lot of big questions facing CMOs today, but one of the most significant is about their investments and whether they actually work. And in particular, the investments around brand and performance. So over the past decade, we've seen a lot of money move into performance marketing away from brand building. But there are signs that maybe the tide is turning. Many of you maybe know the Nike story from last fall, where they came out and admitted that they had put too much money into performance marketing and they were making a shift. And, this is Nike, just do it, like amazing brand building. And even they shifted too far towards performance. But we've also seen new economy brands like Airbnb and Instacart really start to understand that they need brand building as they're matured as companies and the value in brand building. So, um, so like I said, our aim is really to make a 21st century case for brand building. And with this particular report, we did focus on North American data because a lot of the conversation around effectiveness has happened in UK and Australia with a lot of examples from those markets. But we felt like there wasn't a lot of examples from the US. So that was the aim, was to really get the evidence out there and show how it ties to what's happening in the US as well. Second, we really wanted to go beyond theory and help CMOs practically apply this. What could they do with this data? So, how we did it was we built a coalition of partners to help us gather all of the data, and we've been calling ourselves the Avengers of Marketing Effectiveness. But in that coalition is Analytic Partners, who has the ROI Genome Project, and that's based on over 1,000 companies' marketing plans that they have that they use to glean the insights from this. We worked with Bera AI, which is a brand tracking intelligence platform, and they have a lot of similar data across a wide swath of categories and types of companies. And we also worked with Profit, who is a CMO consultancy. They helped us with a lot of the organizational thinking behind this, and System One, which is an, as you know, an ad testing platform, well renowned, and they helped us with the creativity aspect of this. So that's where all the data came from. Okay, so we're going to cover a lot of ground in this presentation, and here are the three things I just want you to take away from it. One, that brand does matter, and stronger brands see stronger performance. Two, advertising works hardest when it does two jobs. And three, this is the key, those two jobs are intertwined. We have to do away with silo thinking. So just some definitions to set the stage here. When we say brand, what we're talking about is what people remember and how those memories interact with potential buying decisions. So when a consumer is in market. When we say brand equity, what we mean is the measure of the value of those memories and their power in the buying decision. And by advertising, we mean advertising in its broadest sense. If you think about the four Ps, it's the promotion part. So that's how we're thinking of it when we use these terms in the report. So first and foremost, as we've said, advertising has two jobs, and the starting point here really is the consumer. So in B2B, this notion is known as the 95-5 rule, but it does hold across categories that it might not be this exact breakdown, but most of your customers are currently not looking to buy, they're out of market. Advertising's two jobs are to nudge that minority, in this case the 5%, who are in market nearer to purchase while building brand association, salience, relevance, whatever you need, with the other 95%, so they are more inclined to choose your brand when they are ready to buy, right? So this generally translates into two jobs, which is the brand equity and the performance. Brand equity, most people think of Super Bowl ads, something that invokes emotion, humor. They're made to grab attention and to build memory structures. Now, how we talk about brand can seem really grandiose, especially if we're talking to finance types, but really it's just about finding arresting and interesting ways to talk about who you are, what problem you might solve, and when a buyer might need you. Performance marketing, as we know, often relies on much more rational functional language. Its job is really just to push buyers who are ready to buy now, give them reasons to buy now. So we all know this, I know, but this is just helping me set up the argument in this report. So I just want to make sure we're all on the same page when I start talking through this. Okay, so advertising does have two jobs, but we have seen over the last 5 years especially, but even the last decade, that investment is moving more and more towards performance advertising buckets. This is from our Marketers Toolkit survey, and we ask a wide swath of marketers, what are your plans for next year? And more, they've been moving money into performance. So this bias towards performance reflects a belief that this activity can more easily be tied to commercial outcomes, and the cost and returns are more readily available, where equity-led advertising, by contrast, often can seem to be using fuzzier metrics, and that's a harder case to make. So the problem with the last decade is increasingly we're just focused on that one job of performance. So think right place, right time, right ad. We've all been drilled in that by the big digital giants, right? And this isn't to say that performance marketing isn't necessary, because it absolutely is. But the truth is, too many marketers are leaning too much on performance, and that can lead to what we call the doom loop. And the doom loop is when you get plateauing growth, which leads marketers to optimize against misleading signals, which means they attribute too much credit to last click metrics, and that leads to an overcorrection in budgets to the wrong type of advertising. So that is the doom loop. So there are two problems with relying too much on performance, which is routinely overestimating the contribution the channels closest to purchase make in that purchase, and then diminishing returns. If you have scale-up brands built on the back of digital performance ad techniques, they frequently hit this performance plateau, and it becomes harder to achieve the easy wins in the category because they're already maxed out. So, is there a better way? We say yes, there is. So the conclusion that we reached after sifting through mounds and mounds of data was that winning marketing organizations do both at the same time. So this is from Analytics Partners ROI Genome database, which is where we drew this chart from. If we remember the two jobs of advertising, right, it becomes clear that marketers that are both building brands and conversion at the same time do much better. So if you move from a performance only budget to a budget that has both brand equity and performance in it, there's a range of how much you can improve ROI between 25 and 100%, but the median is 90%. Most companies can see a 90% lift. But if you go the other way, if you have a mixed approach in place and you switch to performance only, you'll see a penalty for it, basically a 40% decrease in ROI. So far, so good. We've got credible data that shows blending brand performance will drive the highest revenue ROIs. But we realize there's still a problem because the way people sometimes respond to the data is actually going to undermine those returns. So we've talked about the two jobs of advertising and we've talked about the two styles of advertising. But if you push that logic too far, you end up in silos, which is what we see a lot of companies doing. And this is not to pick on Hyundai here, because we even saw Nike did it, but they did announce in the fall that they had a new structure where they were going to have a performance marketing team and a brand marketing team with two different sets of responsibilities. So the problem with this is if you have the brand team and performance team sitting on two different teams under two different managers, the brand team is going to be divorced from what's happening in sales. The performance team is going to be less likely to understand the insights driving the brand messages, and it's much more likely that sales and commercial outcomes will only be attributed to performance. Separating the work streams is the problem because actually what we found is that the two jobs are interdependent. So this is a customer case study from Analytic Partners, and they had a company that increased spending on brand and generated an outsized increase in profit from performance marketing. And you should know that in the report, we also have a reverse case study of a brand that reallocated 61% of its budget into performance and saw a significant decrease in ROI. So the point of this is that brand investment has a direct impact on performance returns. So we have another real world example. So we brought Laura Jones, who is a seasoned tech marketer, to Cannes last year, and she told this story. She had joined the background to this story is she joined Instacart right as the company was getting ready to do an IPO, and it made sense they wanted to invest in their brand ahead of that. So she took her brand team and they created this big splashy campaign with Lizzo, but it turned out they only had money to run it for 6 weeks. And in the end, when they evaluated it, they were like, it was a failure. It didn't really move the needle on any of the things we needed it to. And the realization was that the brand building team was working out of sync with the performance marketing team. So she stepped back and tried again, and this is what they did. I'll show this commercial right now. Hold on.
I'm at the football game. What? I'm at the grocery store. What? I'm at the combination football game and grocery store.
Wait, he's at the football game?
What?
And the grocery store?
Nah.
He's at the combination football game and grocery store.
We're watching the whole game. Hold on, our team just scored. You don't have to choose between football and the grocery store.
was so exciting for us about this ad, it really was a turning point. And not only did it improve ad recall by nearly 10% relative to that suite of kind of boring DR ads that we were running that we thought would be more performance, it also lowered our cost per incremental activation by 20%. And this was the smoking gun that we needed. This was definitive proof that telling a good story was better than flashing a giant CTA and just getting someone to try to click now while they're watching television, which no one's going to do anyways. So this gave us now the permission to try this approach in a different way.
So the important thing to note here is that she's looking at what's normally seen as a performance marketing metric, customer acquisition cost, and using the brand building campaign to understand where that metric came from. So, oops, sorry. Oh, sorry, there you go. So we can start to explain how Instacart saw this impact if we look at it through the lens of the marketing funnel. This is a chart from our partner Bera, and what they found is that in a siloed view of the world, you would think of brand or equity building as upper funnel and performance as lower funnel. But when they looked at the data, they showed that strong brand equity drove results across the whole funnel. So you can see that it moved all of if you went from awareness to consideration, it went up, consideration to usage, usage to preference, preference to advocacy. The other thing they found, if you're investing in equity-led campaigns, it helps deliver pricing power. So it not only leads to more sales, but it very often leads to you being able to have a higher potential price point for those sales. So this is why we say it's not brand plus performance, it's brand times performance. As equity strengthens, it affects all elements of the tunnel. It's not just upper funnel or lower funnel. So an investment in brand is an investment in performance. So what does this mean for people who are actually needing to create campaigns? Well, Jenny Romaniak is a leading marketing effectiveness expert, and she is a big fan of building brands. Although if you looked at this quote in isolation, you might not know that. But her point really is that we make a mistake if we pigeonhole advertising solely a brand initiative and divorce it from commercial impact. So the advice we give in the report is to think of platforms and not campaigns. So you need a creative idea that's big enough to be employed across different executions. You want to think emotional brand building that builds memory and reasons to buy right now. So a great case study that did this is McDonald's Famous Orders, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, but let's just go through why it worked, right? So the insight, the strategic idea behind this was that even famous people have their go-to McDonald's order. But tapping into celebrities to promote their specific orders, McDonald's was able to grab attention for their brand and for their products and use that same messaging at point of sale. So the strategic idea was also a great fit with social media, and they got some of their highest social media metrics around the tie-ins with the celebrities. It also drove awareness among one of the key demographics they were losing ground with, which were young multicultural audiences. And it did so profitably. This was a very profitable campaign. It brought in $280 million in incremental sales. And for every dollar spent on marketing, the return ranged from $3 to $8 per meal, depending on the meal combination. So I also have a comment from Tariq Hassan, who was most recently McDonald's CMO. I think he did just leave.
And as Marcus said, we don't have a conversation about brand versus performance. We won't participate in that debate because we believe it is all about brand performance. Last time I checked, anything we do from a brand perspective should perform. And the last time I checked, no customer simply wants to be acquired.
So that final point he made, no customer wants to be acquired. This is a point we make in the report as well, that we need to introduce more brand techniques into our performance marketing, which is why it's so important not to have the teams be separate. You want the same sentiment going out, the same ideas driving all your advertising. So here is an example from Zen Business, which is an online provider of business registration, other startup services. It had tried brand campaign and just it didn't drive new registrations. But while that campaign was in trying to figure out what had happened, why it wasn't driving registrations, a competitor started offering free LLCs, and they felt like they needed to match that offer. But what they did was they figured out they could use this brand campaign to make an emotional appeal in those promotional messages. So it wasn't just offering a free LLC, it was offering free LLCs to mothers who had dropped out of the workforce to start their own business during COVID-19. So you had that emotional appeal to like be your own boss, get back in the market on your own terms. And that result raised brand awareness and it gained over 20,000 leads from moms and increased signups by 78% and decreased the cost of acquisition by 50%. So what does it mean when you're thinking about your budget? What does the multiplier effect do for your budget? So that 90% lift, you're probably wondering, like, what do I do with budget to make sure I can get that 90% ROI return? So there's no one single correct answer for anyone on how you should invest in brand, but we did, through all of the data we gathered, come up with what we're calling the brand baseline. In order for your marketing to work, it needs to have scale to succeed, and it must be seen by a broad range of potential future buyers as well as current in-market customers. So a minimum of 3 out of every $10 invested in advertising should be directed towards equity-led advertising. That's what we call the brand baseline of 30%. But the most impactful advertisers dedicate in the region of 40 to 60%, with most leaning towards the 60%. No less than 50% of your budget invested in brand. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to go. There we go. So that's the brand baseline. We also have what we call the search ceiling. So analytic partners, after they looked at all the data, also discovered that more than half of brands are overspending on search relative to the impact on their business. Most companies should not spend more than 25% on search, and this is what we call the search ceiling. However, there's no one way to do it, right? So there is going to be variation. So for example, companies that are mostly almost all e-commerce sales will need to invest more in search because that's their key distribution strategy. But if you have multiple distribution channels rather, the 25% rule should work for you. So when we look at all of that data and all of the ways that people do their budget, we've come up with this spectrum. We call it the brand investment spectrum. And you can see for most companies, they fall within that 60% investment in equity-led executions. Okay, but here's where the finesse comes in, because it does matter where you're starting out. So if you're a value or a volume player with a premium positioning, you're going to need to maintain pricing power. So you'll need to make an investment to grow and sustain brand equity. So performance should be used with limited discounting and really focus on reminding people the reasons why to buy and pointing them to the places where they can buy. If you're an early stage brand where you are in your brand lifestyle, say you're an early stage brand, you usually emphasize few channels with low upfront costs and relatively clear payback, meaning performance is going to dominate. But key decisions here are to what point in the growth cycle do you choose to invest more in equity leaning techniques and how to create platforms that unite the two, because you can't stay in that performance mode forever, because as we know, you'll get into the doom loop. So third is you have to think about what the nature of your purchase journey is for that product. So discretionary and impulse purchases may lean harder into performance, but considered purchases need equity-led advertising to keep the brand in the consideration set. So you'll also need to consider where your brand equity stands in the market to decide on the investment. So if you're a stable, successful brand, think like Apple, you can do a 50-50 split, and that will work. If you're a brand with a lot of familiarity, but you're losing relevance, you should lean further into brand investment, spending, say, 60% on equity building. But if you're a company with a smaller, dedicated audience of passionate fans, but you lack a lot of familiarity, you should be directing 60 to 90% of ad budgets to help you become more known and respected at a wider scale. The messaging should lean into proven drivers of resonance in an overarching platform. So brands with unaided awareness, think of, say, Sears, who everybody knows, but it really doesn't have a lot of cachet anymore. Performance is only going to be wasted here. You really need to be almost putting 90% of your ad spend in to revitalize equity. Okay, so those are all budget considerations. So let's talk about measurement, what you need to think about for measurement. Okay, so MMM is increasingly going to be the starting point of a modern measurement stack. Key concept is that it helps illustrate baseline sales, sales that would have happened organically if no marketing communication is going on. So this is going to be really key to determining your true incrementality and help the CMO make forward-looking recommendations. You also need to, you can do other things in market experiments and multi-touch attribution. You can use that to validate models and to provide guidance when needed, but you mostly are looking at a way to identify baseline sales and incrementality. So there are 6 key principles you need to think about when you're putting together a measurement plan. It's incrementality first, which we mentioned. It needs to have incrementality at its heart. You need to show that advertising is bringing in new customers and not simply taking for credit for sales that would have happened anyway. So this means no double counting, no reliance on inaccurate methods such as ROAS, and you need to have a clear view of baseline sales. You also need to make sure that you're combining paid, owned, and earned, that all media touch points are in a single framework. This is difficult because media is fragmented, but siloed metrics, for instance, something that comes from just a single digital platform is not going to give you a comprehensive view. And then you also need to recognize that you're looking beyond immediate impacts to judge full short-term effects within the purchase cycle. So incorporate known media and brand effects such as diminishing returns and long-term impacts. So when Profit did a survey of their marketers that they looked at, they found out that most of the outperforming marketers were putting together scorecards that included leading and lagging metrics, meaning that they were looking at the long-term effects with the short-term effects to understand the full picture. And those companies were outperforming the lagging companies. So you also need to recognize multiple routes to impact. So advertising returns are measured across the full business, all sales channels, and all customers, not just existing customers. And you need to track the impact of strengthening brand equity on ROI and incremental revenue. You should also control for the 4 Ps. So measurement recognizes all factors, controllable and non-controllable, that influence the business. So think of all the marketing levers of the 4 Ps plus non-marketing factors. It should also influence forward-looking decisions. You can't spend too much time looking at backward-facing report cards. You have to allow for scenario thinking. So we know that this kind of measurement stack will need the cooperation of the full organization and supportive leadership. And next month we are coming out with a guide that is putting together evidence to help a CMO make a case to the CFO and CEO on why they should be investing in brand building platforms. So that will be out at the beginning of May, and it's sort of the follow-up to this multiplier effect, and will help with a lot of these questions for how you get to the point where you can have a measurement stack that does this. So we know if you have a client who isn't tweaking an integrated approach, or if you're on the journey to creating this integrated approach, it brings up a lot of questions, such as how do you direct teams to deliver creative consistency across work and to drive both brand equity and action from consumers? How do you determine the right level of brand investment for your company or your client? As there's a lot of complicated thinking that needs to go in that based on all the different factors. We know that's an issue. And then how do you get a unified measurement stack that lets you see holistically how marketing is actually contributing to the growth of the whole organization? So we do have guidance on all of that in the multiplier effect. This QR code should get you to the page that allows you to get access to the report if you're not a WARC client. If you are a WARC client, you should be able to see it when you go into warc.com. We have a whole page on the multiplier effect. That is sort of the big overview of the report, and I hope that was helpful.
Thank you, Ann Marie. No, this is great. I absolutely love it. There's a few things that really jumped out to me as you were kind of taking us through here. One is the 90% median lift.
Yeah,
I mean, holy cow.
yeah,
That to me was it on its own kind of sells this idea of the multiplier effect. Another thing that maybe we didn't touch too much on, but I noticed that when you're showing the levels of investment between, okay, did brand investment increase versus did performance investment increase or stay the same over the years? I noticed that in 2020, performance investment increased, which it goes counter to what I would have thought. Do you guys know why that happened? Like, media was cheaper, you would imagine, because all the budgets were being pulled. That was people's chance to grow, right? Their mental availability
I think
and brand equity.
well, because 2020 was when we were all stuck home, right? So I think a lot of the thinking was we just need to drive people to the e-commerce sites. We just need to drive people. So it all shifted to performance, and it may have given an artificial boost to what performance actually was doing. And we do have evidence on WARC that shows what happens if you stop doing brand building advertising. For a couple quarters, you're still going to look good, but then you are going to hit that doom loop and you've actually dug a hole that, is harder to get out of at that point. So it shouldn't be thought of like we shouldn't be thinking of like, oh, performance is short term and brand building is long term. And, I ran a brand building campaign. I won't see the effects of that for 3 years. Like we should really thinking about the brand equity building as lasting as opposed to like short term,
Mm,
long term. Should really be like you're always on, constant drumbeat that is in front of the consumer, making sure that that 95% is thinking about your brand when they get around to thinking, I need some soup or whatever it is they're going to buy.
yeah, yeah. No, and I think like to me that was the big reframing as opposed to being brand plus performance is brand times performance. Like I know I often bring this metaphor to my clients is that, you have to water the tree before you can pick the fruit. Like
Right.
at some point, if you stop watering the tree, there'll be nothing to pick from. And I think that is really that metaphor of multiplying the performance effects, right? So
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, it's I've heard Elizabeth Paul from Martin call it like you've got to grow the fruit and then harvest, right? So you can't harvest all the time because then you'll leave the crop with nothing to like replenish it, right? So that's what it's almost like fertilizer, your brand equity. It has to keep going. It's got to be on. Yeah.
love these agricultural metaphors.
Yeah.
Um, I will turn over here to the audience if anybody has any questions, but maybe I'll kick it off with a few as folks are kind of gathering their notes here. Um, do you guys have at work any hypotheses as to why we've slipped so much into performance spend over the past 10 to 15 years?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the digital giants and just the fragmenting of media, which has meant that you actually need more specialists to understand everything that's going on and how your platform, all those different platforms, you need somebody who really understands the nuances of all those different platforms. And so that kind of leads to the siloing, right? Because as you get more and more specialized, you think, oh, the person who's overseeing them need to be specialized as well. And so I think we've seen just sort of maybe a misunderstanding of the CMO's role. You know, a lot of places, sales and marketing almost get separated, and they're not in charge of all of the pieces of things that marketing actually drives. You know, marketing should be driving growth across everything. You know, it's your way to get future customers, but I don't know if it's often thought of that within organizations. Um, and a lot of times, if you're in that performance doom loop, what you're doing is just talking to the in-market buyers. I mean, we've all gotten the, I just bought something, and then 2 days later, I get served an ad for the thing I just bought, right? Well, I don't need it, I have it, but I'm getting the ad, so
Yeah,
that's an issue, right?
yeah.
But I
No,
might be more responsive to an ad just from the brand to remind me why I liked what I bought, so I'm ready to buy more from them later. Yeah.
yeah. It's interesting, right? Because I feel like before 2008, our targeting capabilities weren't all that great, and so by default, we kind of were overinvested in brand, I would imagine, and so that there's this saying that the 20th century was the century that we built the greatest consumer brands, right? And maybe that was because we didn't have all this power of targeting in our hands. Could that be the case?
Right, exactly. Well, I do, I mean, it really did shift. You know, I think that's the problem brand building. People just think of what's my big TV ad. And it's so much more than that. It's not one TV ad, or it's not even, you know, one theme song or one jingle. It's your all of your communication. And I think the problem with the C-suite is they often just think all that marketing is the P, promotion, not price and product and you know where you're distributing. You should have sort of some marketing thinking in all of those, but it's not often the case anymore, which is why we're coming out with the guide to CMOs helping to make that case to the CEOs, because we know
Mhm.
unless you get the right thinking around the investment, you're going to not get the budget working out correctly. So that's not always
Yeah.
in terms of the CMO. They need to get the CEO on board.
Yeah, yeah. I think marketing's impact can go so much further than just the promotional P, right? And I think, don't get me wrong, I think the promotional P is the sexiest of all the P's,
Yes,
and I think that's why,
it's fun.
is the funnest, yeah. But I think, aligning, for example, yeah, your distribution to your positioning, for example, right? If you're a luxury brand, does it make sense for you to sell at Costco? Probably not, but would that be a decision
But
that finance would be able to
maybe
make?
depending what product you are, because there are a lot of luxury people, like, I mean, very well-off people who shop at Costco. So, right?
True. Yes, it's true. It's true. I know there was this interesting case study around Dom Perignon trying to sell at Costco, right?
Oh,
And
funny.
right, and it was a funny one because it's yeah, like there's people that can afford Dom Perignon at Costco, of course, but Costco would essentially their whole model of presenting product is it's value. It's about value as
Yeah,
opposed to um it's about value and price as opposed to the premium of the brand. And
right.
so that's where you kind of start seeing some interesting questions, right? The marketers need to ask themselves around distribution. Like,
Yeah,
does it
that's
make
true.
sense?
Yeah. And then often though, like if you think, oh, I see Dom Perignon as a case sale at Costco, maybe you think I am getting a great deal because that is a premium brand as opposed to Kirkland champagne or
Yeah.
whatever. You feel like you've won there, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and then you mentioned something around value brands as well, which I thought was super interesting. I came across I'm reading one of actually Jenny's books right now called Better Brand Health, which is a fascinating book. Anybody, looking to understand how to measure, brand equity. And she mentions that, yeah, private labels, basically is being floated by their physical availability. They're
Hmm.
just well distributed, right? It's not because people are seeking private label. It's just that they can easily be found, right? And so even when you're talking about budgeting and allocation and stuff like that, do you see a role for this multiplier effect in value brands like that?
Well, I think then it would be it's the actual retailer brand that's driving it there, right?
Yeah.
Like think about like when Target was always thought of as Target, right? Like,
Mm.
oh, it's stylish enough, even though I didn't pay a lot for it, you know? So it's just putting the brand less on the product and more on the distributor, I
Yeah,
guess
the
it is.
retailer.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's a great point. I'll open up the floor. Anybody here on the call, if anybody has any questions for Anne Marie, um, by any means, I will turn over the mic right now if anybody has any questions. If not, I have one more question here that I can throw at you
Okay.
before we, if people think about them. So, um, one of your final slides there around established brands, brands are growing or they're not as established, and then those that are small, don't have a lot of brand equity established in people's minds. Though I find it interesting, the smaller brands are often the ones over investing in performance
Hmm.
because they're trying to keep the lights on, right? It's
Hmm.
like, how do
Exactly.
you, and so in your experience, how have you pulled them from the brink? How do you see people, at work like, pulling their small brands from the brink and say, hey, no, gotta focus on brand,
Yeah.
60,
Um,
90%.
I recently did a podcast with Preston Rutherford, who has an online men's apparel brand, Chubbies, which has actually recently been sold. But he talks about how he hit that point where they were like, we are just going to go out of business. And it was because they just kept going back to the same well of existing customers, had completely worn out that aspect of the market. And he's like, we need to do brand building. And he realized that they needed to change their tact. And he didn't do big TV ads, but he did start running his best performing ads with a brand message in all the digital channels where they already were, Instacart and YouTube. And he said, you can brand where you are, but what you want is to convince somebody there's a reason to click. They know your site, they already know you, to click in and buy at full price. He's like, that is a very valuable thing. And he actually does a lot of almost, I call them Socratic dialogues on LinkedIn between a CMO and a CFO that breaks down how you should be thinking about it. And they're very instructive. Uh, and they actually are often very funny too. So it's kind of, I would seek him out on LinkedIn, Preston Rutherford, because he was in that moment of like, he's like, we were either going to close or I had to figure out like how we are going to get more customers to know Chubbies. That was the name of
Interesting.
that's the name of the men's clothing brand, Chubbies.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think I've heard of them. Are they primarily e-commerce? Is that what it is?
Yeah. I
Right?
think he
Okay.
does have they do have some store distribution now as well, but they started out e-commerce only.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you see e-commerce brands falling more into this trap of performance? I would
Well,
imagine. But
as we point out, you probably are going to do lean heavier on performance if that's your only distribution channel. But like Chubby's found out, there's more value in getting somebody just to come to your site without that discount push, right? So it's like the idea of like, it's let them know where they can get it, why they should get it, but not lure them there with like 10% off, big sale today. Like let some of your brand equity do the work of getting them to your site. He's
yeah.
also very keen on incrementality. He was like, we had to get to know what our baseline sales were before we could understand whether we were actually growing the business or just selling the same customer something at a cheaper price over and over again. Yeah,
Yeah. It's those famous, light category buyers, right? Those are the ones that are going to drive your brand growth.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you noticed, obviously you're talking about silos and, obviously there's a lot of brands doing this, siloing their marketing departments. Um, what is the advice there for brand for
Yeah.
marketing departments? Like what should they do to avoid that?
It's really the CMO understanding that they need to make sure that those teams are communicating and that there is a very clear brand platform that every execution is hearkening back to. So you want that branding. You don't just want to send, we've got 10% off today sale. Like use some of your brand to get people to come check out the sale. But like you just can't keep pushing just the discount message, I guess is the point. Like you really, so the CMO needs to like understand like that the performance team can be taking elements of the brand building equity work and infusing what they do with it, which means people will have more of an emotional response to it. It just won't be one more thing in their inbox. It won't be one more SMS they can ignore and delete. That you're giving them a reason to interact with your brand and engage with your brand.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. Yeah, because
I think it's also maybe if there's no role in the company of a CMO who has the power to look to really push for that change, it's going to be much harder to do this, right? So if you have a client who you only have a CMO who's really only charged with doing brand building work and has nothing to do with the commercial aspect of like how did we sell, it's going to be very hard to get past that, because you're often then competing within the organization is almost competing with itself, right? Because now both managers want to like, I need budget, I need budget, I need budget. Like instead of understanding how you flow the budget back and forth is going to help you continue to keep future customers coming in.
because I think the hardest part, I've been on the client side and I understand the pain that brand managers might have with this. It's that how do you sell the idea of brand to the CFO
Mhm.
because brand equity metrics do move at a glacial pace, right?
Right.
Have you seen any kind of tips or advice on how to have that conversation with the
That's going to
client?
be in the guide in May.
Amazing.
Coming up with guide in May, we're going to have lots of evidence and lots of things that you can bring in and say, this is how we need to be thinking about it. And I mean, I think it's going to be really difficult now that we're in this new land of tariffs because there's going to be a lot of artificial pressure on pricing that aren't really market pressure. It's just silliness that's going to be influencing it. So I think it's going to be hard to continue to hold the line, but honestly, like I think when we are probably going to get out of this, and when we do, your brand is going to need to be something that consumers trust and that they ask for. And if you think about how many people are outsourcing their shopping to like an Instacart or a DoorDash or somebody, just get me. You're going to want them to say, I want Hellman's mayonnaise, not just mayonnaise. I want Heinz ketchup, not just ketchup. So how do you get them to do that if they don't know about your brand? They're not going to ask by your name. They're just going to say,
Yeah,
need the generic one is fine. Just get me the generic one, whatever's cheapest.
yeah.
So it's it's worth investing in the brand building, but you need to show the CFO how it's actually going to lead them to growth. And so that's the key is like you're cutting off your nose to spite your face if all you do is focus on the performance and the discount.
hmm
Yeah.
Well, I find it interesting because here in Canada, you guys, I don't know, in the States, you guys probably haven't experienced this, but here in Canada, you walk into a grocery store,
Mhm.
every item has like some items have a maple leaf right next to the
Heard
price
that.
point.
Yeah.
And so people now are seeking Canadian brands,
Right.
right? So it almost becomes a new category entry point.
Guys for the US, I'm very sorry. We're all over.
It's not everybody, I understand. Uh, yeah, but it's
No, yeah, see,
right.
it is because now you're giving that's another reason to buy, which is outside of the company's control, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And we've seen a lot of brands not really trying to grow that mental market share with that
With
made
that
in
little
Canada
maple
category entry point. Like,
leaf.
I want a Canadian brand.
Yeah.
And we're seeing now becoming very busy, like, everybody's claiming the same message. And so it's becoming really difficult to cut through. But I think at the point of purchase, if you think about physical availability, a lot of people are making decisions right on the shelf.
Right.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's really
It's
been happening.
it's understanding how your brand platform can fit into like a cultural moment for sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's almost like you have this other factor now, which is the nationalism variable.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
I
really
know. It's
interesting.
what do they say? It's interesting times to be alive. Very interesting times.
Yeah, yeah. That's the safest word to use.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so predictions here. So let's make a prediction then. So if you look at that slide that you had that it was from 2019 to 2024,
Yeah.
growth in performance versus brand. What's your prediction that's gonna happen? What does that bar chart's gonna look like for 2025 and 2026?
Well, I was hoping that all our good work this year on the multiplier effect was going to move more people to say, I'm going to invest in brand. But I have to say, the last week has left me a little unsure if it's going to work out for this year.
Yeah, those
Uh,
external factors.
the external factors are getting more and more rapid and more unknown until they're on us. So. But we are hoping that we can get more of that conversation going between the CMO and the rest of the C-suite so that, um, we just want to help people grow their business. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, 100%. Um, So I always save one last question here before we wrap up these Grow Your Brain, you know, shows. I'm sorry, I'm gonna start calling it a show because it's not a podcast, it's not a lunch and learn, it's a show. Let's put it that way.
sure. Okay.
Um,
Thank you for casting me.
yeah, there you go. But before I would just give everybody one more last opportunity here to ask Anne Marie any questions. If not, we'll start wrapping up. Any questions for Anne Marie? Or was she crystal clear? Well, silence is golden. So
Okay. Thank you. Thanks
But
for having me.
okay, great job.
I
So
just
okay,
I
so
want to reiterate with Pedro to say thank you so much for sharing this with us. I think it's great that you guys are taking such an innovative approach, I think, to looking at this because it really is. I think it's often been thought of as like it's one against the other and being able to bring them together. And I think it's really interesting as well, just even using some of the metrics that have traditionally been used on one type of media to measure another feels like a really different way forward. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, thanks. Well, we're going to continue to be talking about it probably throughout the rest of the year, so lots more chances to like catch up with it. And we are looking for any great examples of companies that have come up with a great integrated approach, great brand platforms. So I'm always open if you have like anyone, or if you have a case study that comes out of it, we're always interested in that. So I would love to hear from you guys if you have anything.
Great. Thank
awesome.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So before I leave us with that final question, I just want to say if you are not an APG member, APG Canada member, this is your time to become one. There's no better time than now. The amount of initiatives that the group is doing, and of course, uh, Grow Your Brain Show is available for members in the portal for you to rewatch afterwards. So if you missed out on it, um, you can watch it afterwards. And then, of course, we have our great friend Spencer from Zulu running Let's Do Lunch as well. It's another monthly, well, I guess that one we could call Lunch and Learn. It's in the name. And last time you had John Crowley, fantastic strategist here out of Canada. And yeah, stay tuned for next Grow Your Brain. We are planning some very interesting things for May and potentially June. So stay tuned for that. And then I'll leave us with one final question for Anne Marie. So, what is something that you're reading, listening, or watching that you recommend us to check out to grow our brains?
I've been working with System One, and I have to say the Uncensored CMO podcast that John Evans is doing is really great. And he did just recently have um, uh, the show, the face down between Rory and Scott Galloway. I'm forgetting Rory's last name now, but
Sutherland, Rory Sutherland.
Sutherland, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought that was really interesting. I've been seeing clips on that on LinkedIn. So I've just really been focused in on anyone who's just tackling the big questions. So I think he does a good job, the Uncensored CMO.
Amazing. Yeah, I echo that. I love that podcast. I listen to on a weekly basis. So great one to check out.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for coming. Thanks everybody for joining in, and stay tuned for the next Grow Your Brain.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you.
you. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.